Are we live? We're live. Hello. Yay. All right. So welcome. We are back having another open conversation with Transform Network. And this time, our October 2015 open conversation, we have an amazing group of panelists and we have an amazing topic. One might say quite a big topic. We're going to be talking about decolonization of the self and of the gospel. So welcome. We are end of our faith. Having another open conversation. We have feedback, Steve. Are we good, Steve?
I think we're good.
Okay. All right, that's our technical guru for the evening, Steve Knight. So Steve will be helping everyone out on the YouTube side. So if you're tuning in live and you have questions, if you want to participate in conversation, Steve is who is going to be helping you out. But he will probably appear just like an amazing green, black, and white swirly, the Transform logo. So, but he will be there to help you. And my name is Micky ScottBey Jones, and unfortunately, I think I'm the only one without the cool little box at the bottom this time, so you won't be able to look at my name every time, but I also work with Transform Network as the Director of Training and Program Development, and so I've gathered some amazing people today to have a great conversation. So just a little bit about our open conversations at Transform. These are free, fun and interactive conversations on faith and justice issues, and you can check out past conversations on our website, transformnetwork.org, under the Action tab, and we host these about once a month and have a variety of topics, and often they go with kind of some of the things that we're going to be talking about at our upcoming gathering every year, or just things that are going on in the world that we need to talk about. And so, you know, we're at that time of year, right, where we start talking about colonization, really. We start talking about pilgrims and Indians, and we just had, you know, in some places, Columbus Day, where one of our panelists, Matt, is in Portland. They just shifted to Indigenous People Day. Yes. Woohoo! So these types of things are in the air, in the consciousness right now. So we wanted to talk about what that looks like on both a personal level and a broader level, a theological level, faith level, and even more for ourselves as a whole and as a country and even the world. All right, so you can follow along online on Twitter. We have some pretty amazing Twitter folks out there, and we use the hashtag TFOpenConvo throughout the conversation. You can also go to the Transform Twitter, which is at TRANS4M, Transform, and of course our Facebook. And you know, conversations will be going on right there on YouTube. And one last thing before we get started, these conversations are just like a little taste of what we do when we get together at our gatherings. And our next gathering, besides some smaller regionals that we'll be talking about later about racial justice, we have our big gathering coming up next April in New York City with Middle Collegiate Church and Middle Project. And we will be doing a conference called Revolutionary Love, Tools, Tactics, and Truth-Telling for Dismantling Racism. It's going to be amazing. Bishop Yvette Flunder, Reverend Jackie Lewis, myself, Robin Henderson Espinoza will all be speaking, and we'll be introducing more speakers. It's going to be an amazing time, April 15th through 17th, 2016. So, again, you can go to the website and check that out as well. All right, so I would love to start by just briefly letting you know who our panel is tonight, and then I am going to hand it over to them to introduce themselves. So I will just go down the line here. We have AnaYelsi Velasco-Sanchez. I need like a sound effect button so I can hit it, and there's like a crowd roaring. Can you hook me up with that, Matt? Because you're a musician, like.
Yeah, that's the best I can do. I'll do it every time.
So much more exciting now.
I don't know how to do that. And then we have Matt Morris. Say, give yourself, yay. Shonda rhymes with Sandhya Jha. Hey! Look at that. Oh, Tech Guru came through. We have Yu-Shuan Tarango-Sho. And Teresa Pasquale was supposed to be with us tonight, if you saw the things before, and she is sick, so say a little prayer for her that she feels better. But we'll be making an exciting announcement at the end about her new book and all that stuff. So, all right, so if you guys would say a little bit about yourselves and maybe the work you have going on, or your organization, or what you're doing in the world, that would be a great way to introduce you to everyone who's tuned in today. So, AnaYelsi, let's start with you.
Okay. Well, again, my name's AnaYelsi. I am the Mid-Atlantic organizer for the Reformation Project. We're a Christian organization that's working for the full inclusion of LGBT Christians in the church. So we're very grassroots, organizing focused, and just deeply passionate about providing people with a strong biblical case for full inclusion. Part of what I love about our organization is it allows me to also explore one of my other deep passions, which is decolonization, and a fully anti-oppressive model for social justice is something that we have are working really hard to implement in our organization. Through our Academy for Racial Justice, and just through the platform that we provide for speakers and the connections and networking opportunities we give people. So that's who I am on a professional level. On a personal level, I'm someone who identifies as Indigenous Latina. I was born in Venezuela, came to the United States when I was a child, when I was young, and it's something that obviously as an immigrant, as a woman of color, as a Latina, deeply influences how I approach the world and how I engage the world and the church and the scriptures. So that's a little bit about myself.
Yay! And did you mention that you're a pretty amazing artist as well?
Oh, I am also an artist. Yes. Those are mine.
Oh, awesome! Fantastic. Thank you so much. All right, Matt.
Well, hi, my name is Matt Morris, and I'm really honored to be here discussing things that I haven't had very many opportunities to talk about in group. I realized this when I went to Wild Goose Festival this past summer for the first time as a performer to play music, and wound up having conversations about identity and decolonization that I came to discover were quite personal. But before I get into that, professionally, I write songs and have been in the music industry in some form or fashion for most of my life. I've put out a couple records and helped other people put out a few records too. I live in Portland, Oregon, and am involved in a lay ministry called the Wayfarers at First Congregational UCC Church in Portland. My work is to help to forge meaningful connections between people in the congregation and those living outside on the streets in Portland. So personally, I'm not actually sure how I identify in this conversation. I think it's the first step is acknowledging while I'm white passing, I'm sort of mixed, and my mother's side of the family is not actually particularly clear or on the same page about how they identify. Some say Hispanic. My grandma's a little more stubborn about which words she uses, and so there's just not a lot of discussion about it. So I come into this discussion not in any way as an expert, but as someone who's actively in the process of trying to find the right language to articulate a sort of very complicated identity, both in family and personally.
Thank you for involving us in your journey. That's really special.
Thank you for allowing me. I appreciate it.
And Shonda, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sure. So I'm active in the Disciples of Christ. I'm an ordained minister in the Disciples, and I do anti-racism work there. I'm also the director of the Oakland Peace Center, which emerged out of a tiny little urban congregation that was ready to leave a legacy because they weren't quite ready to kind of relaunch themselves, and they realized they wanted to make an impact in our city around the issue of violence. And so we've turned First Christian Church of Oakland into the Oakland Peace Center, which is a collective of 40 different organizations working to address peace and justice, equity and access in the Bay Area. So I'm pretty proud to be a part of that community. And I'm also the daughter of a father from India, West Bengal, and a mother from Scotland. So have been in this country most of my life, but was born in England and was shaped very much by what it means to be a light skin, able to pass as white, except for the fact that my parents very intentionally branded me. I'm not, I'm not Sandra Renee Jones. I'm Sandhya Jha, and I think they did that so I would always remember who I am.
Nice. Wonderful. Can't wait to hear more about your story. And Yu-Shuan, tell us about yourself.
Yes, I'm Yu-Shuan Tarango-Sho. It's so fun to be here. I really appreciate the space and even how you frame it, right? It's open conversation because it's a process, it's a journey, and we're all on this journey, right? So I appreciate that and appreciate all the viewers and your own journey as well. I can share a little bit about me. I am a 1.5 generation Taiwanese American. I was born in Taiwan, Taipei, Taiwan, came when I was 9, and I did not speak a word of English when I came, so there was all this process, of assimilation and all that's, and even as an adult trying to process and relearn what I learned, and the implications of being an immigrant, of being a woman, and all of that. I am a mother of 2 Hapa boys, Latino and Taiwanese, a 4-year-old and a 6-year-old. And it's been really fun, to really integrate them in my call as a pastor, my call as a prophet, in this world. So I always say, right, children are our teachers and our prophets. And so, right, they give me hope and they also teach me. And they teach us tons about what is justice, what is just, and what is love, what's compassion. So I really feel honored to have that role, right, that identity as a mom. I am also the director for a program, a ministry called Jesus, Justice, and Poverty Institute. It's a year-round institute that cultivates, right, it's a movement that cultivates among young people a emerging prophetic community. Right. Initially, we thought of voices, but I think it's because we're created and designed to be in community that prophetic voices can only be heard and amplified in communities. So, as a movement, we are cultivating prophetic emerging communities that bear witness to God's love for justice and compassion, and that's grounded in our spirituality, in our knowledge and experience of the divine, of God, And what's really unique, and I feel like is key to JJP, is that in order to really challenge colonialism and neo-colonialism, the leadership and discipleship has to come from the margins. So almost all of the people who are mentoring and teaching and discipling our students in the program are of color, both inside and outside of the church. And the majority of the people who come to our program are people of color as well.
Nice.
So, yeah.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing. That's so lovely what you said about your boys. And I've always said I have 3 kids, that they are like the greatest Bible study I've ever had, right? Like they force me back into the scriptures, and I'm like, I don't like them right now. So And it also, what you said also reminded me of, I can't remember who said it originally, but it may have been Richard Twist may have said a version of this, is that if you're doing ministry in some kind of context with people of color, and whether it's urban ministry or whatever, and none of your mentors are people of color, then you're not a missionary, you're a colonist. Right?
Yeah.
So it's one of those things that people need to be looking at, and I feel like more programs are trying to change, but to have a program that's like that's part of their DNA, I think that's a beautiful thing. So, and I feel like everybody knows me, but like I said, I'm Micky ScottBey Jones, and I work with Transform Network, among other things. I'm a writer, speaker, facilitator, and my passions are a lot of things, but racial justice is one of them. Intersectionality is another. I think we all, in order for me and mine to get free, everybody's got to get free, right? So I really believe in that that deep intersectionality. And a shout out to my peeps. I'm wearing my new my Level Ground tank top. So I just went to their film festival, and that was actually interesting. Kind of got to do some intersectional work there, talking about gender, sexuality, and even race. So let's jump right in, if you guys don't mind. The first thing I want to do is just talk a little bit about what we mean when we're saying these words, right? Because we can get comfortable with words like colonialism and neo-colonialism, post-colonialism, and not everybody's in the same place, right? And I feel like we have to provide entry ramps for people that are at different places. So if you could talk a little bit about what you mean by those words, or just what those words, like how, like maybe even a story of how you understand it, and that may take the form of just explaining what you mean by decolonizing, right? Because I think when we think of colonization, we think of like, that was a long time ago, and now it's done, so why are we still talking about it? But in order to kind of unravel what it means to decolonize the mind, actually decolonize the land, like maybe we just should get some of those pieces out there. So you don't have to cover all of it, but if anybody wants to kind of jump in with what these things mean to them, that would be fantastic. Anybody who wants to start off? Come on, don't make me pick somebody. Oh, somebody's getting picked.
So there's a poet, Mourid Barghouti, Palestinian poet, who Chimamanda Adichie quotes in her very famous TED Talk, "The Danger of the Single Story."
Yes.
And I think when she quotes him, he's actually talking about the necessary precursor to colonialism. And he says, if you want to dispossess a people, simply start by telling their story for them. And begin with secondly. And the examples that spring to mind, a friend of mine was just at Yosemite National Park and said, oh my gosh, Shonda, you won't believe the plaque they have in the valley of Yosemite Park says, U.S. Rangers discovered the Yosemite Valley when chased there by indigenous peoples who drove them into the valley. So there's two fascinating things there, right? There's the narrative of they discovered something and they were chased into that space. So this story is telling somebody else's story, the indigenous people of the Yosemite Valley's story, and beginning with secondly. The Rangers were under attack by the indigenous people. Instead of starting with the people who were invading the indigenous land, the land that had been discovered long before the Rangers ever got there. I think that's the precursor to colonialism. So if we want to start even before colonialism, I think that's an important place to start.
Yeah. That's good. AnaYelsi, anything you want to add about how you look at colonialism or decolonizing?
Sure. Well, I think one of the things is important is just recognizing that decolonization of the lands, of the body, of the mind, and of the church, is often looked at as if it's something for people of color to do, for our well-being or for our spiritual wholeness. And I feel like that's not a complete picture of decolonization and what decolonization fully realized would be for the church or for the Americas. I think we have to acknowledge that we're all implicated and harmed by colonization, and that's white people and people of color alike. And so there's lament and repentance and healing that needs to happen for all of us. So I think first of all, recognizing that it is not for any one group to do. I think it needs to be done in relationship and in community with one another. There's a quote from Marielga Reyes Cruz where she talks about how decolonization is moving towards something, towards a place where we've never been before. And I really like that because it gets at this idea that that decolonization is not an end point, and it's not something much like our faith. It's not something that we're going to be able to look at and say, okay, I've fully decolonized. The church has fully decolonized. But that it is ongoing, constant work and growth and kind of pulling and at the threads of things that don't make sense. So it's a lifelong process. It's this thing out there that we haven't reached before, but it doesn't mean that we shouldn't be striving for it. So I think it's the relational, realizing that it's something for all of us to be doing, that we're all complicit and impacted by, and then realizing that there's not going to be a moment of like full achievement, but that doesn't mean we stop the work.
May I jump in?
Sure, go ahead.
I had a really interesting conversation recently with a student at George Fox Seminary named Jeremy Cushman, who is doing a lot of this really sort of challenging work of decolonizing identity. And one of the things that I brought into that conversation speaks a little bit to what AnaYelsi is saying in terms of pulling at the threads of things. For me, my question and that I brought to him was, are we even able to pull threads? Does that metaphor play out? To talk about the colonization as having woven some sort of blanket that we can unweave or unravel feels like that doesn't actually speak to the process, that somehow maybe colonization has created a kind of mulch of who we are from the scraps of various identities, various cultures, and it has all kind of changed the soil. And then we're all looking at this, going, okay, now what is to grow from this? I don't know if that's the best metaphor, but there's something about the threads. I get questions about, or I question how we decolonize. How do we do that? How is that action lived out? And I'm not really sure. I do know that when I heard recently a song called "Burn the Ships," do you know this song?
Oh gosh, that's Stephen Curtis Chapman.
Stephen Curtis Chapman.
Oh.
I didn't grow up listening to Stephen Curtis Chapman. But
we're not even 30 minutes in. We're already in Stephen Curtis Chapman land. This
Sorry.
is fantastic.
The only reason I'm bringing this up, this really wasn't the kind of Christian culture that I came from, but to recognize that there could be a song that contextualized Cortez and the Spanish ships and that basically make that a kind of nice parallel for Jesus and Jesus's role, and that Jesus is calling us to burn the ships. It's so problematic ain't even the right word for it.
It's bad.
But that, to me, when I saw that, I was like, oh, like that's white theology. Like that is the end product of the colonization of this land through a religious lens. That we can have that song as a musician. It was just offensive to me in all sorts of ways, but. Practically, that's how I'm thinking about colonization right now. I'm questioning it, and then I'm hearing that song.
Yeah.
So Yu-Shuan, where do you start when you're thinking about? Because you mentioned neo-colonialism, right? And I think a lot of times people want to jump from colonialism to post-colonialism, and like, oh, we're past that.
Yes.
How do you define and kind of work through some of these things?
Yeah, I appreciate that question. I mean, I think when I think about colonialism, I think about domination and violence and killing, right, of the mind, of the body, of the heart, of the soul. And then when we see how it continues, the neo-colonialism, there's so many different ways that it continues. It's just in different forms, but people are continuing to be killed under this violence, right? So, and I think it manifested in a way now that when I think about even the immigrant community or communities of color, it's like it's so internalized that the colonizers don't even have to enforce it anymore because we've internalized it so much. That we're so disconnected from ourselves, from our history, from who we are, right? Disconnected from the divine. Like we don't even have access to God unless it is through a colonizer, right? We don't even have a lens to see God except through this colonial lens because that's the only lens that we've heard, right? That's disconnection. That's colonization, right? So the disconnection of the mind, of the heart, the soul, the body, I think this connection, not just to the divine, to ourselves, but to others. So then we don't even, I mean, we are created to be interconnected, right? We're created to be, like you said, right? We're connected to see that our liberation is tied together. But colonization disrupts that. That's part of the violence and the killing. That if we just isolate and make everyone not be able to see our connection, then the killing and the destruction is so much easier, right? Then we can actually, it's so internalized, then all of a sudden I have all these helpers. Like I don't have to do it myself, right? Because they just turn on each other just like that, and we see that so much, even just within communities of color, how we're pinned against each other.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm reading a book right now called Soul, Self, and the Society, a postmodern anthropology for mission in a post-colonial world, right? And there's a section where they talk about that kind of the hegemonic project, right, has been successful in that now it's an internalized colonization.
Yes.
So that we don't question it, right? Like that was the colonial project. If you can, this is why they had the schools for indigenous children, right? If you can kill the Indian and save the man, if you can keep if you can keep the body functioning but kill who they are, then you don't even need the guns anymore, right? You just need to keep up this world you've created. So, like, I guess kind of one direction we could go in is kind of talking a little bit about how that was done with our theology, right? Like this whole idea of dominion theology, and that dominion, what is it? Dominion means domination, and domination includes exploitation. Right, so that's from Reichenwich too. Is this exploitation and like we don't really even question extracting everything from the earth. If you do, you're crazy, like earth terrorist. So, but domination, right, has been a big part of our theologies.
Very much.
Right, at least Western theologies. So. How are the ways we kind of bring in new theologies, or what theologies have you found, or ways of looking at faith have you found are ways of dismantling that or changing that?
I know for myself, even just looking at even the language of theology, and I've had this conversation a few times with people, often around this subject of how often how deeply we're colonized in our faith, that even when we refer to theology, of like the real or the pure, the true, the rooted in history theology, which is so often that of of straight, cisgender, white, often European men. And then we refer to the lesser theologies, and we may not call them that, but they're so often perceived or treated in that way. And that's your your liberation theology, your black theology, your mujerista theology, your queer theology. They all have little names in front of them that are like, oh, there's theology with a big T, and then there's theology for the people on the margins, and that's for them to look at, and not for us as a whole, as a church. And I feel like the truth is the depth of my faith, of my experience as a Christian, was the greatest points of realization haven't occurred until I started treating those other theologies as if they had a capital T in front of them, as if they were as necessary and vital to my formation as a Christian, and to my understanding of Christ, and to God, and to my recognition of like the Imago Dei and others. All of that happened when I began treating these like quote unquote lesser theologies as if they had that big T. And I think that that's something that we need to encourage as a church. Again, it's this idea that if it's created by the marginalized and it's just for the marginalized, when the reality is it is some of the richest stuff that the church has to offer or to learn from.
Yeah.
And so it's interesting that you're saying that. I'm thinking about what Yu-Shuan just brought up, and there's something deeply ancient and biblical about this conversation, right? Because there's this moment where, you know the passage where Jesus says, "You shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you free." And what's fascinating is I always knew that line, but it's interesting when you read the passage, because the next thing that happens is the people who are talking to him say, "What are you talking about? We have never been slaves to anyone." The Jewish people, who every single year celebrated their liberation from slavery. The Jewish people who were in that moment living under the oppression of Rome. Said, "How dare you say that we are not free," right? And so there's something about that internalization that helps the oppressor do the work for us. And so when I was pastoring at First Christian Church of Oakland, we had lots of white stained glass window people, right? And so, and the congregation was almost completely people of color, African American and Asian, and some white folks as well. I started using PowerPoint images of people of color, of Jesuses of color, and a woman in the congregation came up to me and said, "You know, you don't need to do that. I've spent my entire life in this church, and just because all of these stained glass images are white doesn't mean I don't understand that God is like me." And the next week, the same congregant's daughter came up to me and said, "What do you think God looks like?" And I said, "Well, what do you think God looks like?" And she said, "An old white man with a beard." And I turned to her mother and said, "That's why I'm using the other images in worship." Because we all were shaped by those images, right? And and one of the most beautiful things I think I have heard this year around the theology that's emerging from the Black Lives Matter movement is Black Lives Matter and the solidarity work of it will be the salvation of white people. So AnaYelsi, getting to what you're talking about, I mean, you're so spot on in that you're saying there is something liberative for everybody when we are about this work from the margins. So I just wanted to say amen.
Right.
Yeah, and the thing is, we have to remember as well, and I know you guys know this, is how gendered this conversation is as well. When you read, if you can stomach it, right, you may want to do it when you haven't had anything to eat and you're feeling pretty good about yourself. You can stomach reading the actual journals of Columbus and of even some of the priests and missionaries that came to the Americas. One of the ways they described the indigenous people was to compare them to women who they considered weak, right? Because they were welcoming, because they didn't immediately try to kill them all the time. They were they were then putting them in the category of women, which was lesser, which was weaker, which was needing to be dominated and shown the way, and we need to help them by taking over for them.
Right.
And so this has always also been a very gendered, a very sexualized conversation as well, because sexual domination was a part of this from the very beginning. Even the crown and the cross always came together, right? And like the priests they were doing something while indigenous women were getting raped, right? So like there like something was going on there, and it's always been a part of the conversation, and it's kind of part of it that we don't like to talk about now, right? It's not part of what we talk about when our kids are dressing up with where I live, we still have the Thanksgiving with the Indian, with the headdresses and the pilgrim hats. I mean, every kindergartner in my son's elementary school is going to do that in a month.
Oh.
So, and they're going to hear the same traditional story, and, then my kids come home and I'm like, all right, kids, tonight mommy's going to tell you the real story, They have all the books, So, but it's those kind of, remembering that this is an intersectional conversation that we're having.
Yeah, I want to go back to your question, Micky, about dominion.
Yes.
Like I was thinking about kind of the genesis. What is dominion? I think about stewardship, right? And I think where so often it goes wrong is that dominion gets interpreted as kind of a zero-sum kind of deal, right? So then more for me means less for you means more for me, that we can't share power. Right, so then when folks interpret dominion as like domination, then it becomes, I want all of the power, right? And I just think, in decolonizing, in this process, this journey of decolonization, it is people who have been robbed from creative power to reclaim, right? So how do we actually learn how to share power? Right, so I just don't think that we actually know how to do that very well. We don't have paradigms to think about how do we collectively win, and thinking about dominion as I am not God, right? So I think a lot of the history of colonization is people really taking on the role of God over other people. So how do we think about dominion as stewardship and recognizing God as God and us as stewards, and steward is really powerful. This is actually really powerful, right? Authority is very powerful, so how do we steward that together? And it really goes back to that connection, the interconnectedness. And tell a couple stories about, kind of as we've been talking about, the colonial gospel in essence, right? And how we internalize the implication of the results of this kind of domination. In my program, I have these cohort every year. We have a new cohort, and these are all kind of college students, majority students of color. And I have this one Asian American who grew up in the church, right, and who went to Christian school all her life, Christian schools that look like her. So it was a Chinese American school, like mainstream, K to 12, I think. And it wasn't until we were talking about this colonial gospel that the Spirit hit her in that moment, and she started weeping. And she said, wow, I had not realized that I hated the way I look. I hated who I am. I hated the fact that I'm Chinese. Right? And I just think, you grew up, right, with people that look like you all your life. You even went to a school that taught you theology with people that look like you. But yet it's so deep. She was sobbing because there was a moment of this awakening of like, and that, kind of public confession, she said, I realized that I was hating you, God, because I hated the way I look. I hated who I am. And it was that moment that connection happened for her. And the decolonization happened. Liberation happened. Right? And she reclaimed power to see her for who she is, see herself for who she is, right? So reclaiming power and dominion to see the world as God intended, to see herself as God intended, right? And I feel like that just is a great picture of what decolonization and healing could look like, you know.
Yeah.
Well, that just hit me in my heart.
Yeah, and I mean, I would love to talk about those personal stories a little bit, because as great as it is to kind of talk about, and people are asking for resources, you know, so you guys be thinking about that. But you know, you can read all the books in the world, but there is kind of that personal, that moment or a series of moments, right, as things start to, as the scales start to fall off from your eyes and you start to see. Actually, Matt, I would love for you to share if you feel comfortable. I know it's been somewhat of a personal journey for you in recent months or years. Would you share a little bit about that?
Yes, I'm happy to. First, I'd like to say, though, that the thing that's hitting me here that feels both inspiring and challenging is the tension between the use of the word decolonize and the word liberation. Because Yu-Shuan, when I hear you say like it was liberation, she had this experience of liberation, I think that's the sort of like positive framing of what we're talking about when we say decolonization. Maybe I'm not if that's correct.
Yes.
Because I think there's something about hearing the word liberation that feels more catalyzing, that's moving forward in a way that actually speaks that outside of the terminology of colonization. When you say decolonization, it's like you're still being colonized. You're still within that framework. And I want to hear more, not even just in this conversation, but outside. It's the way we take this into the world. The sort of testimonies of how liberation happens, and maybe that's, Micky, what you're asking for me now, but I know that that's what I want. I want to hear those lived out in the world because those who say it believe that God is moving in the world. Like, there needs to me, for this to actually happen, there needs to be some sense of fire and conviction from the people who experience a living God and the people who experience liberation, so that it's not just some sort of a really lofty concept. It's not something that only can exist within the academy, because the academy's burning. So it's not even about the academy, but God's alive, right? Yes. So it's about how God's in the world, how this is happening. Now, for me personally, as it comes to, that's where I feel like I can speak more to, is this sort of like, oh, God is working in the world. Oh, great. Like, what does that mean? How does that in a real, how does that transform my understanding of identity, both as it connects me to my experience of race, my experience of passing as white, my experience of learning Spanish on a secular mission kind of trip to South America, which placed me in an interesting position as an American in South America, but then brought me back and put me even in a more interesting position in relationship to my family, because all of a sudden I could speak Spanish. So it gave me this sort of like sense of authenticity that I never had, because my last name's Morris and not Hernandez. So those were sorts of interesting things that I figured, but again, that's not even connected to me in my lived experience to God and God's liberation. Like, so I don't know how to say to this, except that I feel this sense of longing for those who are experiencing God's sort of liberating love and that leveling of the world in that love. I want to hear that in church. I want to hear that being preached with the sort of like fire of Pentecost. I want that, because I do believe that Black Lives Matter is a theological statement. Like, when I saw that, I read Broderick Greer say that on Twitter, and I was like, yes, I am in. I am in with that. I believe that. So you can spin it however you want politically, but that's true. And I want every preacher to be able to articulate why that's true. That needs to be, to me, like the launching point for discussion about the reality of God. It has to come back if it's going to be framed within a Christian context, or if it's I mean, maybe that's the wrong way to say it, but if it's more than just a social justice movement outside of the context of a Christian practice or identity or faith, it always has to come back to God. We always are pointing to God. We're saying no because God. And so to me, finding that language in practice, I don't know, I just want more of that. I'm sorry if I'm rambling, but I hear that happening here even in this conversation, and I feel like that should be what's happening in every conversation.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Yeah. Anybody have follow-up thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, I think part of it is getting people, I think this idea of decolonization, one, it's such an academic word, and so I think that's hard for people, and it does feel like it's, because it feels so academic or so social justice-y, it makes it feel for a lot of people within the church as if it's not a Christian ideal, as if it's this lofty social justice dream, or that it's idealistic in some way or unattainable. I've even heard the response of like, well, this just is just natural progression of people mixing in a country, and like, why are you questioning it? It's just how the world should be. Instead of looking at decolonization as a gospel imperative, as something that is necessary to the core of who the church is supposed to be and to what the kingdom is supposed to look like. That when you read scripture, when you're reading, Revelations 7, and you're hearing about all the people and the tribes and the nations and tongues, that for that to exist requires decolonization. It requires that there's a pushback against assimilation, a pushback against hegemony. Like, it just realizing that there's gospel imperative in that. I think framing it in that way for people is crucial, and realizing that you asked, like, on the personal level. For me, it's impacted how I read the word. It's made it come alive for me. I mean, I'm reading Daniel right now, and it's like reading a book I've never read before, even though I've read it so many times, because I'm reading it now as a person who is a few years into this process of decolonizing her mind and her faith. And suddenly I'm reading this story about a young guy who actively fought against assimilation, who gives this picture of being so deeply rooted in his faith and still so deeply connected to his culture and to his heritage and his people, and God blessing that. Like, that is a subversive reading of scripture that makes it come alive for me. I want people to experience that sort of thing. So, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. That's good. All right. I'm just going to check in with our YouTube people. We have one thing to share so far from Twitter. Steve will let me know if we have anybody else that has a question. So if you do have a question, now would be a good time to type it in over at YouTube. But hi Karis, she came to the gathering in DC this year. So glad to see her tuning in. And she says, I grew up on Awana, in Awana world, and won trophies for knowing my Bible. And she says, I'm realizing I was really winning prizes for knowing white theology. Because we're always learning scripture through a theological lens. Yeah. We don't often realize that we all have a theological lens that we're using, and even our understanding of who we are comes from some kind of lens. The what is it? The PRI, the Public Religion Research Institute, found that 6 in 10 Americans believe that God has granted America a special role in human history. And for conservative Christians, that's like 80%, and then like for liberal Protestants, it's like 45%. So there's a really wide range within Christianity of who believes that. But, like, that's kind of part of the like a Christian American story, right? Is this like God somehow bequeathed the land, which is so deeply problematic.
Yeah.
So what do we do with that, right? Like, how do we decolonize the very Christianity that is like what we know that's.
Yeah. Micky, can I share a little bit my own kind of journey?
Sure, yeah, that'd be great.
I can speak to that too. So I wanted to share a little bit because I think, I appreciate, Matt, kind of your question about what does liberation, the journey, look like. And I feel like I'm very much on this journey as well. But seeing these different stories, I think it does frame this question in a different way. So we're not just reacting, like we just want to be decolonized, but we're really proactively seeking something bigger and more beautiful than just trying to problem solve, So like I said, I grew up, as an immigrant. I came when I was 9, and I have no paradigm for kind of for theology, no paradigm for colonization in this country. We got plugged into a Chinese immigrant church. And I think what I realized in reflection is that church just perpetuated kind of the model minority myth, right? It perpetuated this white supremacy, which I think a lot of immigrant churches do. So then I was taught to just, just be a good person, right? As taught to continue to achieve, and play the game, right? And it felt like that church was kind of an introduction to helping immigrants know the game in order to play it well, right? But who dictates and who actually rolled out the game, And there was no critical analysis of that. It was just, this is how you play the game. This is how you win. So, at a very young age, when I came to this country, I associated America with Christianity, and again, kind of even though there are people that look like me, it continued to perpetuate that, right? In order to succeed, you need to learn Christianity the American way, So I think even in thinking about a little bit the model minority myth, because it is a myth, right? It's and how it has damaged me, and so many people like me. So I was introduced to Christianity at this immigrant church. I was not really interested, but it was like, okay, you're teaching me how to play the game. So I'm going to play the game. It's very explicit. It's like you just got to do what they do, And at a very young age, I was taught, both inside and outside of the church, who are the people that are winning? You stay with them. You don't associate with people that are losing. And it perpetuates this model minority, right? Because what it does is that it makes Asian Americans, it blames other people of color, right, for kind of the injustices. Because Asian Americans made it because we're the model minority, we're the honorary whites. So a lot of Asian Americans, like, again, it's so deeply internalized that we don't even need the colonizers to tell us anymore. We just tell ourselves that in our churches, in our congregations, in our gatherings. We perpetuate that, right? So then there is this kind of disconnection. I learned at a very young age, I don't want to associate with black and brown folks. I just want to be white. But what does that do to a young child, right? That there is something inherently really bad about me that I'm going to spend the rest of my life trying to pay for, right? Trying to like make up for. But I know I'm never going to make up for it because I can't change the color of my skin, So it continues to be perpetuated. It wasn't until, so when I went to college, I got connected with a Christian organization that I think, they're trying, but I think in that time, in that period, it continued to perpetuate that. It was still this dominant narrative of, you tell me how to read scripture. You tell me who my God is. So it wasn't until junior year, I took an Asian American Studies class. I was among all these activists who hate Christians that I really, and I tell people this, that is the moment that God unveiled my eyes. That is the first time that I saw my narrative and I own my story as beautiful. That God used these people outside of the church, used these Christian haters to convert me and to liberate me, right? So it was the first time that I actually saw, I have a place in this country. I have a story to tell. And that God, I was made well. That no one else told me that, gave me that initially, except through these Christian haters, right? So then who are the prophets among our midst? Who do we need to listen to in order to be liberated, right? And so that's so much part of my work, right, to include those voices because of my conversion experience, So I think, this is my last thought, I think, in kind of being liberated from this Asian American model minority myth, what it taught me is to be silent, to be numb to the pain, right? To just ignore all of the sufferings and the oppression that my people experience in order to play the game, in order to win. Right? It's this numbing and this silence. And it has done, Asian Americans are one of the highest suicidal rates in this country. it has done tremendous damage in our community. We can't talk about it. We don't know how to talk about pain. We don't know how to talk about trauma. We just externalize it to other people among ourselves. So then we externalize it among other Asian Americans. Like that kind of jokes, the racist jokes that we like put on each other, that is like an evidence of that, right? That we don't know how to deal with the trauma, we just externalize. But the liberation comes from lament, like actually seeing the wound, right? And that is kind of taking ownership and being liberated from the theology that we have been given, right? So then there was a period of time I couldn't even read the Bible because, you know, I came out, right? I came out and the veils, right? The scales were falling off my eyes, and I felt liberated. And I was like, I can't do this anymore. I can't go back to Scripture.
Yeah.
I couldn't read Scripture. And then the Holy Spirit invited me to re-engage through this new lens, right? This new lens of who I really am. And then I saw the good news. Before that, it wasn't the good news. Before that, it was indoctrination.
Yes.
Right? But I saw the good news for the first time. So part of the gift from that it is the how do I recognize my wound? Lamentation is recognizing the wound. Like, whoa, there's trauma here, and we need to address that wound together.
Wow.
Yeah, I think that's part of it. Okay,
that's so good.
I said a lot.
No, that's so good. And I really want to throw it to Shonda because, you know, as an active pastor, minister, right, who's having to put this in the context of like what is the gospel, what's the good news, like this can be really heavy, you know, like AnaYelsi said, we're talking about all this academic stuff and it's heavy and we're, you know, got to decolonize your mind. What's the good news? Because Jesus hasn't been good news to people in the global south, right, to colonize people. So how is it actually good news?
Well, and I think one of the things that Yu-Shuan said that was kind of the gospel word for me was together. We've got to figure this out together. I think one of the things we don't pay attention to is the way colonialism, of the way we read the text itself, how much that impacts us, so that we read things in the text that aren't actually there. Yeah. Like, I've had this conversation with so many people where I've said, have you noticed that the Lord's Prayer is written in the first person plural, not the first person singular? Everybody thinks of the Lord's Prayer as an individual prayer, even though word for word, it's about the collective, because Jesus was promoting this vision of a beloved community, and he was in a collective community where there wasn't so much of a focus on individualism. What's really compelling about that, and what I think is important about that, is the liberation of the text. The gospel message that Jesus has for us is liberating us for that colonial vision of isolationism, which is the flip side of individualism, which is a very Western ideal, which is one that tends to be imposed on communities. That isolates us, that causes that sense of desperation and aloneness that leads to such high suicide rates within our Asian American community. And I've got to say, what I love about being at the Oakland Peace Center is right now, I'm in my office at the Oakland Peace Center, and directly below me, I don't think you guys can hear it, there are 40 Mongolian children shouting chants in Mongolian because they're from First Mongolian Christian Church, which is theologically far more conservative than I am, but they're one of our partners. They're working with the newest immigrant population in the United States, a community that deals with very high rates of alcoholism, domestic violence, gang affiliation, because it is so isolating to be a new immigrant community here. And while they preach a very conservative Christianity, they also preach a valuing of people's inherent worth and dignity. And so right now, the floor is vibrating with the proud chants of these deeply Christian young people learning Mongolian wrestling and not being ashamed of that part of their culture. I think there's something really inspiring about that.
Oh, that's so great. We do need to begin to wrap up because we are at the 1 hour mark, and I hate that because we have so many wonderful things we could continue to talk about. Just briefly, as we bring it to a close, I was hoping you guys maybe either have some resources, some books, some authors, blogs. We can, of course, put some stuff up at the Transform Network Facebook page, and tweet some stuff out. I know Steve's been doing that as well. But if you guys have, resources or places you would tell people to look, oh yeah, Sandhya Jha's book. You can talk about that. You can talk about your own stuff too. It's okay. I will say my plan to disrupt, at least, if not dismantle, white supremacy and neocolonialism is I've decided that, you know how we always refer to like colored people time?
Yep.
Or black people time so here's what I found. Every people group of color says this about themselves. They all, we all do it. And actually recently I found out my LGBTQ friends say that too. They're like, honey, we have, and I'm like, what?
It's gay time. We're on gay time right now.
We gotta take time to say goodbye to everybody. Make sure the next thing.
Right? So I'm like, apparently the only people that have like on time are like white Western folks. So
funny.
Why do they get to be in charge if they're the only ones that do this?
Maybe their time is wrong.
Right?
Right.
Oh my God!
So
Revelations.
we all embrace that, except for like when you need to catch a plane. Other than that, we just embrace this other time, and then see we've changed the whole world because we've embraced it as the norm. Mm-hmm. Yay! Okay. Anyway, so resources. People are dying to know what books they should read, what authors, all that stuff. So go. Who's got something?
Well, I just want to say, I'm sure everyone's going to name books that I would have named anyway. So what I'm going to encourage people to do instead, I mentioned earlier about this idea of theology with the little t not being as valued. Well, a part of that is that, proof of that is how many amazing people are not published authors, are not mainstream names.
Yes. Yes.
And since a lot of you are interacting with us on Twitter and social media, my encouragement to you is to go there for the voices of these groups who are honestly doing the most relevant work, the most and have some of the most insightful, passionate things to share and to impart to us. Some of the names that I would recommend from a number of different communities in quote-unquote marginalized groups are Broderick Greer, Allison Robinson, Winnie Vargas. There's just Mark Charles for Native theologian. We were talking earlier about this idea of what is lament and what it is to deal with the pain of all of this. Mark Charles has beautiful words to say about how it's not just you're a racist or I've been hurt by racism, but to recognize that we are all what he calls traumatized people. That's both one who engages in racism and the one who is impacted by it. And I think it's a very humanizing picture of everyone involved in these kind of wounds. So Mark Charles, I can go on with so many names, but yeah, go to Black and Indigenous and queer and Latina Twitter. Robin Henderson Espinosa, there's so many incredible people who you're not going to find necessarily books by them. Some of them, but they're sharing wisdom on a daily basis.
Yes.
And since we were talking about him earlier, speaking of awesome people on Twitter, we were talking about Kenji. Anybody know his handle? I think we should just give him a shout out, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Oh, what is his
At a
Twitter
fresh
handle?
mind.
At a fresh mind. Oh, he's going to be so happy he got a shout out.
Yeah.
Shout out! I bet he's flossing his teeth right now.
So true.
And, Shonda, would you tell us a little bit about your book?
Wait. So this wasn't actually the one I was going to bring up, but I do have a book that just came out this March. It's called Pre-Post-Racial America, Spiritual Stories from the Front Lines. It's just a collection of stories from people's lived experiences around race, interwoven with stories from the Bible. I really think that it's not enough for us to know each other in the fullness of our stories, but I don't think we can get very far in transforming systems of oppression unless we know each other, Black and Asian and Latino and Indigenous and white, in the complexity and the intersectionality of our stories. And I believe that the Bible actually has a lot to say to that. The book that I was going to recommend was actually Rita Nakashima Brock, who's a mentor of mine, wrote a book recently called Saving Paradise that talks about liberating the gospel from empire and how the gospel was colonized and what we can do to reclaim it. It's a dense read, but it is powerful, and I can't say enough what an important text it is.
Nice. Matt, you got something?
I do. It doesn't address this subject directly, but it's a book that has sort of got hold of me, and I brought it into the congregation in Portland at First Congregational, which is a predominantly white congregation, upper middle class. There's a lot of discussion about empire and about the recognition that empire exists, and that we have to first address that's a paradigm we're working in. It's interesting, before you can even get to the discussion about how colonization is a tool of empire, you have to make people aware that, like, we're in empire. And this book that I've been reading is by Henry Nouwen, not an author, not a person of color, but someone who cuts to the core for me. And the book's called The Selfless Way of Christ: Downward Mobility and the Spiritual Life. So this concept of downward mobility is something that we're bringing up in conversation in our church, because if we, as culturally, especially in white culture, if there's the belief that the progress and movement up in the cultural ladder, even in churches themselves, is what we're supposed to be doing with our lives, that ends up justifying all kinds of misuse of resources, grabs for power, essentially the temptations to be powerful and relevant and sensational, as Nouwen frames, motivates us to do all sorts of other things. So this is, in some ways, it might fit in certain contexts to read this book to introduce to people the idea that what we've always thought about as success in the American model and the Western model is actually not even connected to the gospel. And the gospel is calling us into allowing for sort of God to move us toward the simplicity of Christ's walk in love for one another. I love
Yeah,
her book.
Nouwen is a bad mamma jamma. I love Nouwen. So
Good.
Thank you for sharing that. And Yu-Shuan, I'm going to go to you next, but I just want to just briefly put in a plug for, I'm a student with NAITS, which is North American Institute for Indigenous Theological Studies, and so we do theology from an Indigenous perspective and for the Indigenous student, but they let in people who are not primarily Indigenous, identifying like myself, and white students and Asian students and all kinds of students. So we have a symposium every summer that goes around the U.S. and Canada. Everyone is welcome. And we also have online classes, and then in the summer we have some in-person classes as well. So that's an excellent resource, and several of the professors have books out. Randy Woodley is a name you need to know. Richard Twiss, who's no longer with us, but his latest book just came out, and it's I can't remember the name of it now. I have it over in the corner, but Rescuing Jesus from the Cowboys, but there's a part of the title I'm missing. And Ray Allred. You can find other articles. Is it called? It's called Rescuing the Gospel from the Cowboys. Okay. And Terry LeBlanc, Andrea Smith. So there are just so many wonderful people that you can find work out there from an Indigenous perspective. That's a whole nother way to look at theology, and they often get left out of talking about other types of theology. They really get left out, but Indigenous theology will rock your world. So Yu-Shuan, can you take us home on the recommendations there?
Yes, I think first I really agree with AnaYelsi's point about where we hear, like what narratives do we listen to, and what theology do we listen to, and I think how do we have ears to hear those who don't have books, who don't have the privilege to write, the privilege to be published, and those are really the voices that we often neglect. I have one right here. It's called Teaching All Nations, Interrogating the Matthean Great Commission. So there's a whole bunch of folks, authors of color, really challenging and speaking into this, and one of which is a really good friend who is the chair of the advisory board for Jesus, Justice, and Poverty Institute. So it's super, super sound and good read.
Fantastic. Anybody have any other recommendations before we go?
Just everybody who's on this call should have a copy of the People's Bible.
Yes, it's so fantastic. It's so true. I almost didn't want to buy it because I'm like, I can't buy another Bible. Yes, buy the Bible. Buy it.
I would just like to say that I really appreciate, Micky, the work that you're doing in this space to help to organize these conversations, and that everything that's happening with Transform Network, it kind of echoes what everyone's saying, that this doesn't come from the top down. That liberation doesn't happen that way. It is about amplifying the voices that are in this conversation and allowing them to be heard and continuing to move that forward, and you're a big part of that. So, Micky, thank you so much for what you're doing.
Thank you.
Well, thank you, friends. Thank you.
Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, go ahead. AnaYelsi, go.
I was going to say, I had my stack here that I was reading earlier to trying to refresh ideas, but if you want to know a little bit of an intro into Mujerista theology, there's En la Lucha right there. Miguel de la Torre's Christian Ethics from the Margin. Evangelical Post-Colonial Conversations is actually a collection of
that's so fantastic.
So
yes.
Good. Check this out. And then I would say there's some, I get the desire to be like, what are the Christian perspectives? But, and Yu-Shuan touched on this earlier, there are some people you should be reading who are not necessarily from a Christian perspective, who will deeply and have a necessary impact on your theology. So look at people like Bell Hooks, like Patricia Collins, like James Cone is, but there's so many voices out there that you may not hear about or that may not be Christian. Cone is, but that I think will really help change the way you read other perspectives.
Yes.
So don't just limit it to Christian authors.
Yes, and I'm so glad you said Bell Hooks, because I always say Bell Hooks. So
Doreen Moraga, Gloria Anzaldúa, oh my gosh.
Yes.
I can go on all night. I'm done.
So.
Well, tweet those links out. Tweet those links, AnaYelsi. I mean, because for those who are following you on Twitter, it would be wonderful if you could send out a few with the hashtag.
Yeah, absolutely.
If you'll just tweet those out, and maybe we can get our tech guru to make sure he tweets out all of our. I think we're all on Twitter. Yu-Shuan, are you on Twitter?
Yes.
Okay, good. So let's make sure everybody's...
I'm not good at it, but yes.
Well, let's make sure everybody's Twitter handles get shared. He said he's able to do that. But AnaYelsi, I actually do consider Bell Hooks a theologian. And
absolutely. But I think many people would be like, theologian. That's other.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. So again, I just want to thank our panel, and thank everybody who has been online with us throughout the conversation. It's been fantastic. Of course, we never have enough time, and we don't even have enough time when we get together at our gatherings, but we do get more time. So again, we would love for you to join us in April. You can find information at transformnetwork.org for that. We'll be back in November, and November is going to be great. It's going to be early Christmas, because we're going to have potentially two, we're still working on the second, but 2 open conversations. And like we said, Teresa's book, which you can find on Amazon, I'm looking at right now, is called Sacred Wounds, A Path to Healing from Spiritual Trauma. And like I said, she couldn't be with us tonight, but she'll be with us in November doing a special open conversation on the work that she does around suffering from church hurt, trauma work. We've done some online classes on this, and it's extremely powerful, actually, working through the hurt that comes from the very people that were supposed to love us the most in the name of Jesus, and often can end up doing the most damage. And so you do not want to miss that one. So pay attention on Facebook. On our Facebook page, there will be a Facebook invitation for it as well. And if you go to our website and sign up for the email newsletter, you'll also find out about that open conversation there. And her book is already ready for order, so you can go ahead and get it, so you have it for the open conversation. And then you can also catch this video if you want to make sure other people see it. If you will pass it on for us on Facebook, or email it to your friends and your pastor and your other justice workers, it will be up. The link will be up on our Facebook site almost immediately, our Facebook page, and then it will be on the Transform Network website as well. All of our open conversations are there, and on our YouTube channel, the Transform Network YouTube channel. So make sure you pick it up there. And yeah, I think that's it. So join us in November. We'll have the conversation with Teresa, and we're going to have an extra special conversation with a really, really special guest. So make sure that you stay tuned for all that. And keep up with all these amazing people on Twitter and Facebook and with their amazing organizations. And we'll see you next time. Bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you.